So for week 5, we're going to evaluate and improve thesis statements. Last week, students were generating ideas on their topic of third world poverty. Students also organized their ideas in the sample outline that was given. And last, students were assigned to write a rough draft for their introduction paragraph, which included a grabber sentence, background information of the topic, as well as a thesis statement. So here we'll evaluate that thesis statement as well as improve it. So let's look at the actual concept itself. A thesis statement is the central controlling idea in a writing task. It states the writer's main purpose or point. So a topic is what the author is writing about, and a thesis is what the author is saying about that topic. So it's more or less a viewpoint. It requires you to think about the actual topic and be able to put that information into a main purpose in one sentence. So let's think about this. Letters and emails, they're not going to have a thesis statement. It's usually very clear-cut, very directive, and this is what you need to do. Short stories are very similar. Usually it has a theme or information that follows along, but usually very rarely is a short story going to have a particular thesis. If you're asked to write from that for a literature paper, yes, that particular literature paper will have a thesis that you're asked to be able to make. And very different in what you'll see in your English 1301 course and American literature, British literature, history, and so forth. You're going to see academic writing. Academic writing, it is going to have a thesis. It will have a specific point and purpose that you will need to be able to identify and be able to relate and say, this is what the author is trying to say about the topic. So there are two different types of thesis statement. One is an explicit thesis statement, and it's directly stated in your essay or reading passage, and oftentimes it's found in the introduction paragraph. And what you were assigned last week, it was in your introduction paragraph. Different from that is an implied thesis statement that does not have an obvious thesis statement, and it usually requires the reader to figure it out. Now, for the purposes of this class, very rarely, you're never going to have and write like an implied thesis statement. You're going to be very explicit with it, especially the essays that you, 3 essays that you'll write for me this semester. But on the flip side of that, when you are reading different academic writing pieces, when you're taking the TSI test, you will often come across implied thesis statements, which you just have to figure out, what is the reader, having to figure out with the clues and information that the writer gave. And unfortunately, with that being said, oftentimes it can be trickier, but you have to be able to use information within the paragraph or the reading passage to figure it out. So inside of the Blackboard lesson, I actually gave you a sample that I want you to be able to read. It's an article called Teach Your Children the Building Blocks of Finance. In this particular article, in this particular writing, there is an explicit thesis statement. It's very much so stated by the writer, and so you need to be able to locate that. You need to be able to write that explicit thesis statement on the answer sheet, which is located inside of your Blackboard lesson. So here's a few steps to be able to locate a thesis statement. You need to be able to preview the text, the title, images, what are the expectations that the writer sets you up for. Read the introductory and conclusion paragraphs. Are any claims or assertions made by the writer which will help you indicate what is the thesis statement? Read the entire article. Read the entire essay. Keep in mind the claim or claims that you found in step 2 to see if they're developed and supported in the essay. Go back to the claims found in step 2 and evaluate whether of any of them happen to be the thesis. And if there is no stated claim, or if there are, a few that are equally important, it may be an implied thesis rather than an explicit one. But I'll go ahead and give you a heads up. In this particular reading article that I gave you, it will be an explicit thesis statement that you have to locate and put that whole statement on your answer sheet. Here's another piece that will go into your actual answer sheet itself, this is a little bit different. The other one was looking at an explicit thesis statement. This is an example of an implied thesis statement. It says this particular image is called Education Pays, and it's by and published from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So as you can see, the title is Earnings and Unemployment Rates by Educational Attainment. It means the education that you've earned. So on the left-hand side in the red is unemployment rates in 2012. It's by percentage. And then on the right-hand side is the median or average weekly earnings in 2012. And so you can see the different degrees, the different educational attainments, from the doctoral degree all the way down to less than a high school diploma. So what you need to do is, there is no explicit thesis statement for this image. And let's say that you were given this image and you had to say, what's the main purpose of this image? Well, you need to imply and give and write a thesis statement for this particular image. What is it trying to say? I want you to tell me on your answer sheet, what is it trying to say? So let's continue on. Let's specifically take a look at what you worked on last week, because you wrote a thesis statement last week, and I want to be able to make improvements to that thesis statement. You made a good faith effort and created a rough draft of your introduction paragraph, which included that thesis statements. So thesis statements are generally written, and they're oftentimes revised many times. Furthermore, the first draft of your thesis is really a working thesis, which means it is good enough to work from, but probably still needs some development. So improving a thesis statement means making it more specific, which can be done by answering a few questions. Okay, and here I put in your topic for poverty. Why is poverty true? What will impact poverty? What impact will poverty have on other people or things? And who should care about poverty? So this one particular thesis statement, it really should have some components of these pieces, because your whole topic is about poverty. So let me give you an example of being able to improve your thesis. I actually put an example in here of voting. So here's a poor thesis. The definition of voting, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is to exercise political franchise. And as you can see, there are quotations, so it would have to be cited, of course. So the original created thesis is a direct definition of the term and the topic, which I assume would be further expanded in the rest of the essay. Well, but this is not, this is not what the instructor is looking for. That's not what I would be looking for. The thesis for like a research essay, it should state your interpretation of the topic. How do you view this topic of poverty? What research are you finding? Everybody's going to have a bit of a different twist or turn on poverty than someone else, and that's okay. What's your point of view? So here's a little bit of modification that was done. Voting means having a voice. Well, that's better. But it kind of a little bit vague, because as the writer and further the reader, which for your essay would be me, I don't really know what having a voice means. What does that mean? So here's the best thesis and an improved thesis upon where we started. Voting is much more than a quiet democratic exercise. It is about having a voice in important issues. Well, this is a fabulous thesis, because it tells me, what is voting. It gives me kind of a brief interpretation of voting, and further gives me the point of view that this writer is going to take. So in your answer sheet again, I gave you a working thesis about the topic of fame. I want you to revise the thesis statement used. And remember, a thesis statement, it should be an arguable claim. Not everybody's going to agree with it. Obviously, we've supported by evidence. It needs to be clearly and specifically phrased. Address the topic of the assignment, which here for this practice is fame. And it needs to be a statement. I really don't like questions, because how are you addressing the main point of an entire essay by throwing a question at your reader? So as a writer, I usually don't suggest that. So here's the example that I gave you in your answer sheet, which you need to be able to address. All right, so the question is, what is fame? So this writer, that's what their thesis statement is. Well, that doesn't follow the criteria. It's a question. Remember, you're not supposed to do a question. Okay? So in the question that's stated right below it that you need to answer, tell me, what works about this thesis statement. What's missing or unclear. And then I want you to improve the thesis statement that's given here. Make it better. And the last piece on your answer sheet to be able to improve your thesis statement this week is I want you to go back to your introduction paragraph that you wrote last week, and I want you to take a look at it, and I want you to improve your thesis statement. Go back to the pieces we looked at a moment ago for the thesis statement criteria. Are you following those pieces? Is your ideas clear? Is it show your interpretation and your own point of view for the topic of poverty? All right, and so what I want you to do is make sure that you submit your answer sheet for week 5 to my email by the respective due date.